Imagine that you go out to your mailbox and wow, you get another credit card. Now you go out and you go shopping and you ultimately max that card out. But it's not such a problem because wow, immediately after you max it out, you get another credit card and you go out and you spend that. Now your neighbors are looking at you and going, wow, he or she must be doing really, really well. Look at all these goodies that they're able to buy. You're always carrying in bags of stuff. The problem is that at some point, the interest on that debt, if you are not paying it off every month, begins to erode your ability to buy new stuff. Ultimately, you're compounding interest, which means that you're not even paying all the interest on those cards. You're just paying that minimum, and that interest goes into the principal, and now you're paying interest upon interest upon interest. Well, what do you think ultimately will happen? Unless you make a whole lot more money, you are going to have to declare bankruptcy. So now, let's talk about how debts and deficits, while they make you look really wealthy in the beginning, and that is definitely a form of inflation because you're spending money you haven't earned yet, at the end of the day, it's deflationary because that debt doesn't go away unless, of course, you declare bankruptcy. Let me show you what's going on. Debts and deficits start out as inflationary. Now, one of the things that I would like to point out to you is this little area, that little teeny, let me grab that laser pointer. You see this little teeny blip here? That was World War II, when they were spending money for the war. But all of this, up until about 1971, we were on a gold standard. Gold requires fiscal responsibility, and that means that our government had to balance the books every year. But once Nixon, bam, closed that gold window, well, guess what? That's when the fun really begins. That's a blank credit card to go out and spend, spend, spend. But I want you to think about this. 2024, so far, so that ended in October, we were $1.8 trillion in deficit spending $1.8 trillion that we do not have. And yet we're servicing over $35 trillion in debt. What does debt really do? It encourages risk-taking. Gold discourages that risk-taking because you always have to pay the piper and be fiscally responsible, but debt does just the opposite. In the meantime, look at this total debt. And it's growing at roughly $6.6 billion every single year. Every single day. $6.6 billion a year might not be so bad. But can you imagine if you were spending, that would be like you going out and spending $100,000 every single day on your credit cards. It makes us look like we're doing really well. Inflation does. It goes into the GDP numbers. And hey, look at all of this money that the corporations get to borrow and then use and buy real assets. However, at some point, everybody's got to pay the piper. So I want you to ask yourself, if we've only run $1.8 trillion in deficits, why are we servicing $35.5 trillion in debt? Compounding interest and less income. It's actually pretty simple. And by the way, in case you didn't really see it, on June 3rd of 2023, the debt limit was suspended until January of 2025, which means that $35.5 trillion, that's not real. Actually, there's probably a ton of off-balance sheet stuff. It's not real anyway, but you're going to see this jump right after the first of the year. that is when at some point, I can't tell you exactly when, but at some point it then becomes deflationary. There's only one way to fight deflation, and that's with inflation. And that's what they've been doing. That's what you're witnessing right here. And I'd also like to point out, these gray bars are official recessions, which means that, as you can see, every single time we hit a gray bar, the speed at which we grow debt and the amount of debt that we grow, the speed goes much faster, the amount goes much higher. And look at this. Since 2020, it's going straight up. You can draw your own conclusions from that, but understand that whether you're a government, you are a corporation, or you are an individual, the laws of economics work the same. At some point, the piper gets paid. And with what we've seen so far, you can expect a lot more inflation coming in. That's why bonds are melting down. Another conversation for another day. But what we're also looking at here is the interest on that debt, just starting from 2020. And right now, the interest on the debt is 1.126 trillion. Well, we've had 3.1 trillion in 2024 tax receipts. So you're looking at over a third of the income going to pay part of the interest on that debt. But what you're really seeing is compounding interest. That means that in reality, the interest that we're paying on the debt, since it is compounding, is a lot higher than you're going to find. But goodness gracious, how many times can you be lied to when you do not know the truth? Every single flippin' time. Only tool central banks have to fight deflation is inflation. And what that really is that loss of purchasing power. Because fiat money inflation, this stuff, right? It is purchasing power destruction. And just like we saw every time they hit a recession, debt was grown much quicker and much higher. This is just since 1965 when, well, actually 1959. Just recently, I was having a conversation with my trainer because I lift weights every week. And he's a pretty smart guy. He's actually an attorney turned gym owner, and his major was in history. And he made a comment about Nixon taking us off the gold standard and Nixon being a Republican. And I said, well, yeah, but President Johnson took us off the silver standard by removing the silver from the coins in the 60s. So it doesn't really matter whether it's a Democrat or a Republican, they're all moving in the same direction. They just want it to look a little different so you think that you've actually got a choice. But the reality is there is no choice. We've been moving in this direction for a very long time. So the Coinage Act of 1965 removed silver from dimes and quarters and reduced the amount of silver that were in half dollars. And that's why when we're talking about what to do for barterability, and you hear me say constitutional silver, and you see my little bags of, dimes and quarters and half dollars, right? These are all 90% silver. So people need to understand that this was a sitting president. I'll get into it even more than that. Unbelievably, go back and read his speech. And he actually says, if anybody tries to hoard the silver, we will break the market. Those are problems. It's not a quote because I don't think those words are exact since I don't have it in front of me. But basically, you had a sitting president threaten to manipulate the market so that you would do what they wanted. And ultimately in 80s, I'll do some more work on this for sure. But ultimately the 80s, the Hunt brothers tested it and they lost. That was the last time silver hit $50 on the spot market. That is a milestone that I think we're going to see actually not that long from now. Okay, so at that point when we were off the gold and silver standard, actually in 65, the purchasing power that was left in the currency was a little bit more than 25 cents out of the original dollar's worth of purchasing power. But then that transition to pure fiat when Nixon, what they say is closed the gold window, it doesn't sound that bad, but handed over control of inflation to central banks. And what do central banks know? They know debt, they know interest, that's what they know. And so today, we're down to 3 cents out of every dollar, and this is official. And the speed is going up. But you know, I'm always talking about fundamental value, right? Of course I am, because I think it's critically important for people to know what the true value of any asset or any instrument it is, what its value is, because that's the only way for you to know if something's undervalued, fairly valued, or overvalued. Therefore, do I want to buy it? Do I want to hold it? Do I want to sell it? Get rid of it? Well, okay, I can tell you till I'm blue in the face what the fundamental value of a dollar is, or any of these tons of currencies, 4,800 currencies that no longer exist, right? But why don't we let the Federal Reserve tell you directly? Okay, Federal Reserve, what is the value of the dollar, the true fundamental value of the dollar? 0. That's from them. You can go on to the Fred, you've got the links, and you can see it for yourself. But it kind of looks like it trails off here, so it's not so bad. Let's take a closer look at that. Because in 2008, we still had almost 5 cents worth of purchasing power. 2008. Now we have 3 cents, but again, every time we hit those gray bars, take your pick, all these gray bars, those are official recessions, the speed of that loss goes up. And therefore, the speed of the purchasing power goes down. Can you see that? So it's incremental, but the faster the inflation, the higher the inflation, the faster and the higher the loss of your purchasing power is. And what's the pattern telling us? Higher and faster fiat money inflation, and therefore higher and faster loss of purchasing power. So are you ready for the deflation and inflation on steroids? Because quite frankly, that's the next step. And first it's going to start out inflationary with all these new programs and tax cuts and all of that stuff. But ultimately, and I don't mean 20 years from now, I think we're going to see this pretty quick. And maybe I'm wrong. I'm putting my neck on the line. By June of next year, I'll betcha the inflation is noticeably higher again. So I'm going to put that on my calendar and we're going to look at it again. And I'm going to pull some data for today. And then I'm going to hold it until June of 2025. And we'll see what that looks like. And this is the spot gold market, going back 20 years, and they're making nominal new highs. And the specific reason why I brought the term in nominal is because this does not reflect the fundamental value of 1 ounce of gold. It simply doesn't, because a rising gold price is an indication of a failing currency. And once you really get that, you make different choices. And you don't worry about all of these 280% in a week market gains from all these traders. All of these markets have really been just turned into trading markets. And it makes people look rich for a while, but it's all built on a house of debt. It's all built on debt. And that's about to go into steroid territory. Let's take a look at silver, spot silver. And you can see how it is concluding this cup. I'm still of the camp that would not surprise me to see silver conclude this cup formation by the end of this year. It might take longer than that. I mean, timing is the biggest challenge of any technician. I can tell you what's most likely to happen, but exactly when? There are things that are way beyond my control. And the more money, frankly, that gets printed, it's going to make things look like the stock market, the crypto markets, all those markets. It's going to make them look great. But at some point, you're still going to have to pay the piper. So do not be fooled. And I wanted to remind you what gold and silver looked like during deflation, during inflation, during hyperdeflation, during hyperinflation, right? Because really the only difference between deflation and hyperinflation or inflation and hyperinflation is the speed of that inflation. It's happening no matter what. The deflation is happening because the markets are so extremely overvalued, and that's about to get it has gotten a whole lot worse in this last week or so, and will likely get even more, right? But then let's look. I mean, it's really simple because there's only one way to fight that deflation, and that's with more inflation. And you can see what gold does during hyperinflation. So you want to make sure, I'm not saying that you shouldn't buy in. You hear my hesitancy because I am not a short-term trader. I am a long-term strategist, and I want to get into position and not have to worry about it. I mean, when I was with Shearson, I had every license. You had to have every license, and it was certainly options licensed, and I did it for a minute. But I'm telling you, you got to stay when it's a risk-on market. And it's a trading market, you have to watch it like a hawk. I have the ability to do it because I do consider myself a technician. I know how to read these charts and what the next most likely outcome is. But is that the way I want to spend my time? No. I know this is severely undervalued. I know this is severely undervalued. And I definitely know that the currency is at the end of its life cycle, and all they have is to print more and more and devalue it more and more. Even the Federal Reserve is showing you its true fundamental value is zero. So you can have 10 trillion Zimbabwe notes, and you can't buy a darn thing with it. Do not be fooled. Whatever you're going to do, make sure you're properly diversified. So if you're going to play in these markets, rock and roll hoochie coo, you got to do what's right for you. I can't tell you what to do, but I am going to highly recommend that any wealth that you're holding in these Wall Street fiat money markets is properly diversified with hard assets in your possession. So if you haven't already set up your personal sound money strategy, don't be fooled by others that may say, well, we have a strategy. Make them explain it to you in a way that you can understand it. Make them show you what's the exit strategy. That's a very simple question, and they should be able to answer that quite easily. I know we can, because this is a strategy that I've worked on since 1987. It's a pretty long time. And every single one of our strategy specialists has been personally trained by me. I meet with them every week. I have one-on-one sessions with them every week on a rotating basis. Any question comes up, I'm right there. And since I'm the author of the strategy, probably not a bad thing to have in your corner. So, until next we meet, I want you to keep in mind, don't be fooled by the lies. You want to play in that arena? Rock and roll hoochie coo. Make sure you're properly diversified. Make sure you have your sound money strategy in place. And make sure you have all of the other areas of the mantra secure so that no matter what happens, it doesn't really matter to you, right? That's food, water, energy, security, barterability, wealth preservation, community, and shelter. Get it done. And by the way, make sure if you haven't done this yet, go back and watch the interview that I did with JP Cortez on Sound Money. He's from the Sound Money League. I'm also going to be seeing him in Vancouver, so I'm super excited about that, to get to meet him and have a conversation with him in person. And by the way, we'll be doing 2 more lives when I leave for Australia on Thursday. And we'll be doing lives from Australia, but we have to move the time a little bit, so that is something we could actually do. So here, typically, we do it at noon Mountain Standard Time. From the next 2 weeks while we're in Australia, we're going to be doing it at 2 p.m. Mountain Standard Time, but it'll still be live, and I'm still going to be doing your questions, taking your questions. So be there. I'm very excited about going. And to my friends in Australia, make sure that you let me know that you saw this video. And until next we meet, please be safe out there. Bye-bye.